Dynasty Theory, your source for everything Dynasty Fantasy Football. With your hosts, John Bauer.
Looking to sell everybody price dependent.
Dan Lamagna.
Too much dysfunction in Cleveland.
And Mitch Sorensen.
Well, it's hard to compete with excellence.
Welcome back to another episode of Dynasty Theory, a proud member of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast Network. I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. And of course, we try to get rid of him every week, but he is back. Dan Lamagna, that's at FF Coach Dan on Twitter. What's going on, Dan?
John, man, I'm just fresh off drafting my championship Scott Fishbowl team, and I'm a little confused by your sign because I have like a similar sign here that says the champ is here, and it seems a little bigger than yours. I don't understand. Maybe Mitch could clarify. I don't know.
Listen, the size doesn't matter. It's all about the effectiveness and the.
Is this a Manscaped commercial coming up there?
Not yet. Even though we'll get to that shortly. And then we're also joined by Mitch Sorensen. That's at DynoMC on Twitter. And look at that fresh DeAndre Swift jersey in the background. You were finally moved into the new house.
I'm out of my dad's basement. That's great. It's, you always think moving, once you get moved in, it all settles down. But then you start finding all the little things that got missed when they built the house. So you're like, oh, we need to get that fixed, and we need to get that fixed, and we need to get that fixed. So it's just a whole nother headache started all over again. But I have my podcast room set up. I did it the first night that we got in the house, and that's all that matters.
Well, I owe you a very big thank you, and there's sarcasm in that thank you, because you sent Dan and I the pictures of the house, and I showed my wife, and we literally just moved, 2 months ago, and she's like, oh, I think we have to move again. Like, she was absolutely in love with the layout. It's very nice, very nice.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Both of our walls look nice, Mitch. Like if our leader would just match and stop trying to stand out like this and show us up. I don't know. Come on, John. Listen,
I just moved. I'm actually in the office now. I'm not in the basement. So even though it looks similar, I'm not. I relocated within my house. My wife, I wasn't relegated to the basement any longer like an animal, and I'm gonna paint the wall. Dan, I know you give me a hard time. And Mitch, we said how long until Dan makes a comment, and it was pretty early on tonight.
Pretty quick.
Is this where you tell our YouTube listeners live tonight that by the next show that wall will be matching ours?
Yeah. So the color is agreeable gray. That's the name of the color. It's very nice. It's going to match our downstairs as well, but it's going to be a nice gray and not this pish yellow as we keep calling it.
We look forward to it.
Yeah. So this could be the segue. We talk about pish yellow. Well, let's cut away here and get a word from our sponsors very briefly. Guys, we have another great show for you today, but you know what else is great? Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-belt grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. I know it's a little uncomfortable and kind of awkward to talk about, but let's be honest. We have all had close calls when doing a little manscaping. The only cuts we want to happen are the players being cut from our dynasty rosters. Luckily, all that danger, it's a thing of the past. And that's exactly why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer and just released the Lawnmower 3.0. It's perfectly engineered, long battery life up to 90 minutes, water resistant. It has an LED light, and it's also super quiet. Of course, Manscaped is known for the below-the-belt grooming, but it doesn't stop there. Use it for a haircut or just to clean up that unruly chest hair. Guys, make your significant other happy and keep things nice and clean down there. Get 20% off plus free shipping by using code Theory20 at manscaped.com. Again, that's code Theory20 for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. All right, now that the important business is out of the way, guys, this offseason, and we've talked about it how many times, it's such a weird dynamic. And obviously everybody knows everything that's going on with coronavirus and the season being in question. We're seeing all these different things happen at the college level. And Dan, I mean, we kind of had some inside scoop with you. You could actually provide some more in-depth coverage there because, being employed by Lackawanna College. But, what are our thoughts here? Like, how there's so much like I'm getting bummed out at the thought there might not be a season.
It's a lot to take in for all of us. It's been and continues to be a roller coaster pandemic here that has made the fantasy football world a test of our endurance, uncertainty like it is in society right now. It has me focusing more on my current rosters, John, than, you guys are always hooking me into new leagues all the time.
Not anymore.
Right. We often get enticed, but now I'm a little more stuck on focusing on, the economy here, really, buddy. It's, do you invest in more teams or I'm losing that, desire to purchase more teams, knowing that there is a chance, and we've seen this in our group chats today, that, it could get canceled or it could get delayed. So my focus is on our current rosters more than getting more teams. That's just a little bit of my take. And then, like I said, I have a little privy to it at the college level. Our sanctioning body, the NJCAA, just announced today that we're pushing fall sports to the spring. So we're still able to have practices. We're still able to do some scrimmages. But you guys know there's nothing like the season.
Now, before we get into the dynasty strategy and really talking about that from a fantasy football perspective, yeah, Dan, you're talking about not looking to join new leagues. This is the longest, I can safely say, the longest I've gone during an off season over the last, I think, 4 years in not joining a league. And Mitch, you and I, every other week, once a startup would wrap up, I have to find the next startup. And I think the three of us, we have single-handedly, we're going to help put Scott Fish's kid through college because of how many leagues we've joined. Especially me, like Scott, I want a personalized thank you from him because of all the money I've invested. But yeah, like new leagues, I've had no interest, and it's kind of talking about that fantasy fatigue. And this has never happened to me. It's like you say to your wife, "Hon, this has never happened to me, hon." But Mitch, what are your thoughts? Are you experiencing any of this fantasy fatigue?
Not really, because a lot of my time's been focused, on the house. But I still think the season's going to happen. I don't foresee there being an issue with it. I mean, the Real Salt Lake, the soccer team here in Utah, had fans in the stadium at their MLS opener this week for their home.
So what? They probably had 10 fans or something.
They had 5,000 fans. I know, we want to joke about it and stuff, but the fact is, there are professional sports going on right now with fans in the stadiums, and we all know that football is ran by a whole bunch of conservative owners. That's just how it is. The owners of Real Salt Lake, exact same thing. And I think that it kind of depends on where you're getting your news from and that sort of thing. But I completely believe there's going to be a season, and it's going to be business as normal for the NFL. I think there'll be a lot more procedurals going into it, all the medical stuff, they'll get it figured out. But I think it's going to happen. So I don't have too much fatigue, and I'm still full bore. If someone has a league opening and it's some cool settings, I'm all about joining it.
I've had people send me trade offers, and sorry to interrupt you, Dan, but I've had people send me trade offers, and I've said this on other pod appearances when I was guesting, but I essentially have said my trade offices are currently closed, and I don't want to make any moves. And Mitch, I know you get on me because you say I play scared sometimes. Well, check my receipts, because my financial situation from my leagues last year say differently, but I had to get
split the pot.
I always split the pot.
I know you do.
You don't have the opportunity because that only happens in championship games. But I've had no interest. People have sent me trades, and yeah, maybe they'd be fine typically, but I guess sitting there and making moves, it gets you in that mindset that, yes, there's absolutely going to be a season. And you could talk to 20 different people right now. You could talk to 100 different people and just get their opinion that obviously we have no inside information. But I think there's going to be a different level and different degree of certainty person to person. And for me, I just don't want to get my hopes up. I'm like that little kid on Christmas Eve, and I'm like, oh, I know I'm going to get that toy that's, Santa's going to bring me. And then the next morning, that toy is not there. And that's the 2020 season.
Two things here. One, to this conversation, I'm going to coincide with probably both, Mitch's optimism there. And then you said insider information, JB. And I will share something that is insider information here on the Dynasty Theory podcast tonight, where if it comes true, and it's not like something that hasn't been out there yet. But I could pick up the steam on it a little bit here, and hopefully we could save this clip in the future. But I do coincide with you, Mitch. I think there is going to be a season. But I think when it comes to us playing Dynasty fantasy football, there's still so much uncertainty of what that season looks like. When it starts, is it interrupted? Do we lose players? It doesn't have that same amount of certainty where, I just have that confidence in, where right now I'd be so actively trading because, camps would be kicking up and we're getting all these news of guys working out, and we just don't have the news we normally do. Like, we're really deep diving for news. So I agree with you, but I still don't like the uncertainty. And then the inside information, JB. So a young man I once coached is good friends with his friend is Russell Wilson's agent. And he asked Russell Wilson's agent, he goes, Seattle is signing Antonio Brown? And he said, likely. So little something for our Dynasty guys, depending on where you're at with Russ, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Antonio Brown. There's just a little bit more momentum to that rumor there that he is going to sign with Seattle. Now, you still have the suspension concerns. When will he actually play? But a little bit of insider information on Dynasty Theory.
All right, well, Dan, I have to ask you because, every single week when we put a show out, I have the little clip that I put out as the teaser on Twitter, Instagram. How comfortable do you feel? Because this is the first that Mitch and I have heard of this. How comfortable do you feel in putting that out there, knowing that if you're wrong, because people say, I have this source, but your source is your friends, nephews, uncles, cousins, second grandmother, second cousin twice removed. Are you okay with me putting that out as the clip this week?
Here, I can pull the text right now. All right, I have the text, and again, I'm not going to give names, but the text said,
"Listen, we need names. We need social security numbers."
Come on, how fast could I scroll here live on the show? My buddy, who is, I won't say the title. He has 2 titles at a school in Florida. Good friends with Russell Wilson's agent, alumni of the school. Good chance AB is signing with Seattle. I guess there was a donation made to the school, and Wilson, so he decided to ask about AB, and the response was good chance.
Breaking news. Let's run with it right now. Let's cut it. Stop the show right now. Let's send it out.
I'm telling you, though, how people get.
Hey, that's for our loyal listeners there. I think it's a Dynasty Theory privilege there. If you're not listening to the show, you don't get that scoop.
I mean, not to get off of it, I think he's going to be signed. I 100% believe he'll be in the league this year. More than likely because teams are going to need wide receivers. We're talking about COVID. If Antonio Brown isn't, on a team at some point this year, I'll be pretty shocked.
Now, are you going to, okay, with that news, if you were that certain that he's going to be signed by Seattle, one, I think that it definitely hinders the upside of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. We've seen somebody had a great tweet earlier today or yesterday, and it showed over the last, I think, 5 years or whatever it was, the most targets per season for the top wide receivers under Russell Wilson. I think 125 was that limit. That was the ceiling. So how does it impact Tyler Lockett? And this is very impromptu because, like I said, we didn't know that Dan was dropping Lamagna bombs on us tonight. And, so how is that impacting Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf from a short-term perspective? And then are you going to throw any feelers out for Antonio Brown?
I think I like Antonio Brown a little bit more, thinking I could have him with Russ Wilson for, let's just say, the second half of the season, assuming there's going to be some kind of suspension there early. But, he's an elite wide receiver, so who wouldn't want to have him on your roster in the second half of the season? I think Lockett and Metcalf, when you are looking to draft them and you're comparing guys around them and you're on the fence a little bit, it makes Lockett, and it takes a little of the luster off Lockett and Metcalf, knowing that's a lot of balls that's going to be gobbled up. But boy, does that make Russ Wilson more attractive, thinking that offense is just going to be loaded.
Mitch, did you notice that he didn't even answer the question?
I did. Yep.
Are you going to go out and buy Antonio Brown, Dan?
There's still a lot of baggage there for me. If I don't have to give much up for him, John, like I try to get him for, a reasonable, fair price right now, but I'm not going to overspend.
Would you send a 2021 third?
I would. I definitely would.
And I don't know if anybody's moving him for that.
Yeah, I think England would. I think they'll move him for a second. but everyone will try to buy him for a third at this point. But I think Metcalf is completely okay because his targets are going to come on those scripted plays for him. So I think Metcalf is okay where he is, but if AB there, like, I'll never start Lockett if AB's on that team. I barely feel comfortable with Lockett as it is with no AB. If AB's on that team, I'll never have Lockett in a starting roster.
And from a dynasty perspective, this, potential 1-year contract, which I think it would be, it shouldn't affect DK Metcalf's value, even though I think I'm a little lower on him than most, but it really shouldn't impact his long-term prospect whatsoever.
Yeah, I have Lockett at the top of the second-tier receivers, but if AB signed, that would drop him right to the bottom. It makes it easier to take the Jujus and the Evans and the DJ Moores and Allen Robinsons, those kind of guys. And I said Metcalf, it's, I'm with you. Dynasty value is still super strong.
All right. Well, again, that was very impromptu, and my show notes, they're always very organized, but that Lamagna bomb was just dropped on us. So we'll see if it comes to fruition, and we'll make sure that I do not release that clip to the masses. That is information that you can only get from Dan's friends, cousins, the janitor at that school, his grandmother, and then the agent gets involved somehow. So Mitch, back to the fantasy fatigue. You said, maybe you were just preoccupied with the move, but otherwise you're fine with the fantasy fatigue. You're plugging along just like last offseason.
See, I'm going okay, but I think what you're saying is how almost everybody feels, because there's been, like, the leagues that I'm commissioner in, I've thrown out a couple of just messages saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing for the upcoming season and the changes I'm going to make. And in one of the leagues, it's a 14-team league, and it got 1 like, and I did that 2 weeks ago, and there hasn't been one message since. Like, it's just really quiet right now to where people just aren't being active. And if they are, they're trying to get people who have hype pieces on Twitter right now. Like, you'll get a Darius Geis trade offer right now because his Twitter videos are all over the place. Mm-hmm. You get Austin Eckler because he's doing, 1-arm pull-ups. But besides that, people just aren't really trading. You'll see one, and then everyone's like, oh, hey, good trade, because we just don't see any trades right now.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet. And I want to talk about that Austin Eckler hype piece very quickly, because I don't know how people keep getting footage of me working out and putting their head on my body, but enough's enough, guys.
Is that bothering you by now? I mean, it's got to be getting carried away for you, John. It's getting old.
Yeah, I mean, you put in all that hard work to look like this, and you want to get some of that credit. I can't even say that with a straight face.
It's hard lifting that many White Claws. It really is.
I will tell you, Saturday night, the 2-day hangover, it hit me hard this time. I told you, Mitch, I fought the claw and the claw won.
You're getting old.
Yeah, I know. Trust me.
I'm enjoying those. I'm enjoying those Eckler hype videos, though. He is rising rapidly in my rankings here, and I've never been on Eckler. You probably heard me on last year's show, or last season, just not really feeling it. But I just think he's got the perfect situation. He's in phenomenal shape, and I think you're going to see a great season from him. He's like mini McCaffrey to me.
Yeah, I'm much higher on him than I think Mitch is, but we don't really have to get into that tonight. Getting back to what we really wanted to talk about. So, Mitch, you already brought it up because you are the commissioner of a few leagues. And for commissioner insight, I think, we mentioned Scott Fish already earlier, but he does the Commission Possible podcast. And it's phenomenal information. So if you're not listening to that, go listen to it. But for you personally, Mitch, what are you doing, or what precautionary measures, and you being the smart Alec that you are, on the show notes, you put press delete league on MFL if the season were to be canceled. But in reality, what precautionary measures, what are you doing? One, to make sure things run smoothly, but two, also just to make things easier on you as the commissioner, because if you don't take care of it now, issues will pop up if anything happens.
Yeah, no matter what league you have, you could have the greatest owners, your best friends in there, but someone will try to find the loophole. So the first thing you got to go out there now is just set what the rule's going to be. I told everyone I will have everything decided by the end of July, and I will. I'll put it in the bylaws, and this will be just for 2020. But one thing I'm going to do is, most of my leagues that I run are extremely deep. And so there's not a lot of people on the waivers anyways. And so during the off season, I raised the roster settings up by 4 roster spaces for, the 4 rookie draft picks that you're getting. So you don't have to cut anybody if you're drafting. And normally, right before the first game of the season, I make everyone cut those 4 back. So if, it's normally a 28, you could have 32 in the offseason. You cut back to 28 before the season starts. What I'm going to do this year is you're only going to have to cut 1 person now. So I'm going to give everybody 3 more roster spots, which in theory, all the Superflex guys are pretty much owned. So it's going to give everyone an extra running back, wide receiver, and tight end, so they can have some depth when COVID hits. Because one big thing that I don't think is mentioned enough on Twitter is a lot of leagues are ran on My Fantasy League. And what happens is there's a setting on there you can't put anyone on IR unless they're on IR for the NFL.
Right.
And so if your league is ran with that setting, then no one with COVID will ever be able to go on IR. So adding more IR spots isn't going to help at all.
Now, you can have the setting where you can do if they're out. I know there are leagues like that.
Yeah, you can change that. Yep. But all of mine
is that something you would do? But then you really have to monitor that.
That's the problem, is because I don't want to babysit everybody.
Right.
And the problem is, I had a hard time getting people to take people off their IR in March.
Right.
People weren't even, there wasn't a season and people would still not take their players off IR. So just keep it easy for me as a commissioner. I always keep that setting. And then let's say there is only a 10-game season. What I originally was going to do is we were just going to go off total points, because I didn't want there to be a schedule imbalance to where someone wouldn't, there was just a fluky things happen in the schedule. But John, you actually brought up in a different league, and that's what I'm going to change it to. I'm just going off all play. And all play is everyone plays each other every week. It's kept track on MFL. And I'm just going to go off that for if it only runs for 10 weeks, that'll be how the champion is determined. And that's going to be how the draft picks are determined too.
Now, before we get into that more, because I'm glad that you brought that up, but there are a few people watching live here. So if you're in a 1 Dynasty league, 50 Dynasty leagues, drop in the chat here maybe some things that your league has talked about, or even some questions that you might have of kind of how we're looking to handle things. But for me, and I saw somebody, there was a conversation on Twitter and it came up, how are people doing it? And in my mind, I thought, let's say let's just use 10 weeks. We get 10 good weeks. And then all of a sudden crap hits the fan and season's off. That if it's not set in stone, people are going to say, well, I was the point leader. Well, I had the best regular season record. And whether or not it's a free league, $10, $500, especially the more expensive leagues, I think you want to get things in place so there are no loopholes. But I do think that the all play format might be the best way to go. But again, I would love to hear other people's opinions. And Dan, I know you don't commission any leagues. I don't commission any leagues. We're the smart 2 out of the 3. We leave all the hard work to Mitch. But what are your thoughts here? Would you want to see, I think we all want to see something in place from our commissioners.
Most certainly. And, I'm always kind of from that mentality of, hey, just give me the rules, make sure everybody knows them in advance, and I'm going to play by them. So as long as I have that in advance, and I'll adjust my strategy and prepare accordingly. And it is what it is at this point. I just hope we have a season, and then it can go the other way. It might get delayed. I think one of our chats today, they're talking about the season getting delayed and then starting a little bit later. So whatever it is, I just want to know those rules. And I think it's important for our listeners to make sure you know those rules before the season does start.
Mitch, any thoughts if there is, let's just say, worst case scenario, no season, how do you think 2021 draft picks, how's that order going to be decided? Because I know you're going to have commissioners out there and people advocating, especially if they were at the bottom of the rankings, it should be based on the same order as 2020. And I think that is the worst possible way to do it.
It's going to go, I've never done an auction before, but I would figure out how to do an auction. Every first round draft pick is worth a set amount. Every second round draft pick, the same thing. And how many ever picks you have, I'll figure out as a commissioner how to give you that many dollars going into the draft. I'm pretty sure MFL will figure out something to help with that. And if not, I'll just do it off Excel. and
Right.
that's how people will have to enter bids. But that's the only fair way to do it. I haven't heard of one other way that would make any sense that's fair to everybody.
And I think also it's up to the commissioners to, I don't want to say you rule like a dictator, but
you do.
you might have to make the decision, because if you put it up to a league vote, everybody's just going to vote for whatever would benefit them. Everybody's trying to get that edge. So I know Dan's over there nodding his head, but he'd be thinking about what puts him in the best situation. We know how Dan is.
No, come on now, JB. Honestly, though, we're in a lot of good leagues, and I think a majority of our league mates would take the high road and want to do what's best for the league. But it only takes one or two to put a little bit of bias into it. So Mitch is spot on, man. You auction it eliminates any chance of even anyone thinking about being biased. So that's the way to go.
I always tell people that I rule like Cersei. Game of Thrones, like she didn't listen to anybody about anything, and that's how I do commissioning. It's the perfect way to do it. I know you two are like the only two in America that never watched Game of Thrones, and somehow like I became friends with you, and I don't know, there's something wrong with me.
I will say though, because we talk about contrarians all the time in our dynasty leagues and fantasy football, but I can speak for myself, and I think Dan as well. We're not those people that are on Twitter like bragging, "Oh, I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones." I can appreciate how people would like it. I never got into it. I don't know.
You should now. There's nothing else going on. If there's no football season, we might have a Game of Thrones fantasy league somehow.
We'll have to figure something out. I know we joked about a cooking show, but as much as I give you two a hard time, we got to figure out a way to keep the dynasty theory rolling.
John, you know how happy Mitch is tonight that he just got to talk about Game of Thrones for like 2 minutes. That's like all he needed. Even though you and I have no idea one thing he just said, he is happy. So Mitch, if you're happy tonight, John and I are happy for you, buddy.
I'm happy.
All right, well, that's enough Game of Thrones. We don't want to make Mitch too happy. Next question I have for you guys, and I think there's going to be an interesting dynamic and varying opinions here because of what we've talked about in our group chat, but how has this offseason impacted your dynasty strategy? Because we not only have to look at 2020, but I think 2021 it's going to be just as important. So Mitch, let's start with you. What are your thoughts? Where's your head at? How is it, whether it's veterans, incoming rookies, the next year's rookies, what are you doing?
We had a little chat about this, I think a couple of days ago, and me and Dan completely disagree on something. Like, I do not want 2021 draft picks. I've seen what happens when college players, have to sit out the year. And I think if there is a football season that's canceled, it's going to be collegiate sports right now. And like, I don't have any faith in those guys being able to come in with a year off and being able to immediately produce. And I would just much rather trade, because 2021 first still have great value right now. You're still trading them at the peak cost. And if I could get rid of them now and get something that I feel comfortable with going next year, then I'm all about doing that right now.
Dan, we already know that you disagree, but do you want to give some insight there?
See, I'm like a lion right now, just eyeing up his prey. And, going back to like the fantasy fatigue, I don't think it's fatigue. I'm just like eyeing up my target here. It's like steady instead of active like we normally are. And I just think, I've displayed age discrimination sometimes with fantasy football players. And I just think those veterans now are going to be another year older. So those rookies, it's a young man's game. I am attracted by those rookie picks for next year, because what are you going to do with these older veterans that are just losing a year if this season doesn't happen? As far as, if a season, looking at this year, I do want to compete now. So to that point, Mitch, I'm like a little wishy-washy on this. I don't want to like go hardcore into next year's rookie class when, you need guys to win right now, but there is some appeal. I'm like I said, I'm like that lion, really just thinking about my next move right now. And those rookie picks may have a good benefit depending on how things go. But could we get ahead of the curve is the big question. How long do you wait for their season? Could you be taking advantage of this time right now to be getting ahead and making a move, whether you want those rookie picks or you don't? So
now I have two thoughts, because we're talking about the 2021 rookie picks. Maybe there's an advantage, maybe not veterans, but we start to look ahead to 2022. And maybe, especially a lot of people right now, they're thinking 2022, it's so far away. And those picks, they are devalued. So I think if you want to do a complete overhaul, not talking about the strength of the class necessarily, but just the dynamic and the way everything's going right now with the uncertainty, maybe that's the way you go. But then let's look at it the other way. What if we have a shortened season? What if we see 6 weeks? And again, this is all what if, but it's all speculation. But what if we have 6 weeks? The guys that really are going to benefit are the ones that have those veterans, right? The Julio Jones, the Keenan Allens, maybe Le'Veon Bells, whoever. But I think that's a situation where it really benefits you to have those veterans, because if you're doing an all-play format and there are no playoffs, that's probably going to put you in the best possible situation here in 2020.
If you could somehow get the best of both worlds and have a competitive core to compete for however many weeks this season is, but then, sneak a draft pick here or there for next year. I'm thinking it's going to be a shortened collegiate season, Mitch, where, maybe those championship games are played in the early spring. They recoup, they recover, they get ready for a combine, and they're into the draft. I do see your point. Hey, do they lose prep time? How much of an overload is it? How is that managed? We have concerns about this year's rookies, even if it's going to be a regular full season.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's value, and I guess I'm thinking a little more longer term too in Dynasty. Not looking at this as a 1 or 2 year plan, but getting those picks for next year more as a 3, 4, 5 year plan.
And sorry, John, but while I agree with that, we love to say 2 years down the road these picks are going to hit. But we know as soon as week 1 starts in the NFL, all these values are going to flip, and they're going to flip again week 2, they'll flip again week 3, and flip again week 4. So let's say right now, 2021 first, you like your team pretty good, but you could trade that for Adam Thielen, someone who probably only has a 3-year window, and that 2021 first is probably going to have higher value than him next May. I'm taking Thielen every single time in that deal.
What I think we've seen too, and Dan, you mentioned the 2, 3, 4, 5 year window. This situation, more than anything, should show not just Dynasty owners, but everybody in general, that we can't project 5 years out. We can't project 4 years out. And, we can't even project 3 years out. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, especially with all this craziness going on. And I mean, it really is, it's flipped the Dynasty and fantasy game. I almost upside down, but hopefully we right the ship here, because if there is no season, I'm going to drive my wife nuts. She might be looking to move out on her own. I don't know.
And maybe there's a difference in players too to this conversation of, I agree with you on an Adam Thielen, Mitch, but the Drew Brees, the Phillip Rivers, they're on borrowed time right now. And if this season's shortened, or there's the chance
you should be trading a 2021 first for those guys anyways, though.
True. Maybe a combination deal here, all depends on the scoring format.
Now there was a tweet, good friend of the show, Ray Garvin, we've had him on a few times. Mm-hmm. He said that if he were a top end prospect and the season, the big time college season got pushed to spring, he wouldn't play.
No.
And could you blame any of these top prospects? If you're a Trevor Lawrence, a Justin Fields, obviously we're talking about super flex primarily in our values, but could you blame them if they didn't play? From a business perspective, I don't want to curse with Dan on the show here, but my butt would be nowhere near that field.
It's a very difficult decision depending on how far that season goes. And, if it is going to interfere with your chance to be a number 1 draft pick, that is a factor. So I think we got to get ready for that storyline.
And especially if you're cramming in 2 seasons in 1 calendar year like that, whether or not you're young and in great shape, there's a risk of being overworked, I think, there in that short time. But then just getting acclimated with the offseason program, what happens to the NFL draft in that situation? And again, hopefully we just see these college schedules, these NCAA schedules play out, and they play conference opponents, and that's it. Because, NCAA, they think magically, if you only play conference opponents, that these kids aren't going to be going out and, hang out in groups and getting sick, but whatever.
Here's something else I wanted to mention on that. It's not, no one's really bringing it up too much, but they should, because they brought it up last year. When they're talking about Joe Burrow, they brought it up. But the salary cap is going to go down next year, without a doubt. Without that many fans, The revenue isn't going to be there, so the salary cap is going to go down. So we saw Chuba go back for a senior season. We saw Travis Etienne go back for a senior season. Guess what's going to happen next year? A whole bunch of juniors that people are high on, they're not going to come out because that salary cap is going to go down. They'll stay for their senior year, get another, full season of collegiate sports in, and then they'll come out. Because, you've seen the numbers. Some say it's going to go down by 20 and 25%. I don't think it's going to be that drastic. But even if it doesn't go up, because that 2022 season is, that salary cap is going to go up by 10 or 15% at that point. So all of those juniors are going to stay in. Like, I just don't see, unless they're going to be a top 10, top 15 draft pick, I don't see any of those guys coming out.
And then did I see it correctly that the supplemental draft was just flat out canceled?
Yep, flat out canceled.
So that eliminates one question that leagues have had.
Well, yeah, that wasn't a question in the first place.
Well, it was brought up, but I know Mitch,
Mitch,
the Dynasty commissioner wizard over there.
That was just the CBA. The CBA,
right,
they weren't going to allow people in just because the season was canceled. The CBA doesn't allow for that to happen.
All right, so we have one other thing we want to talk about. This might be a very short topic of conversation, but it's something that somebody brought up, and I thought it was very interesting. So we're talking about players potentially sitting out. There are some unique situations for players that could sit out. James Conner, obviously some previous health issues, compromised immune system. You have Matthew Stafford, whose wife, she had the brain mass, and obviously that's something to keep in mind. Is there any thought there, or is it just kind of, if these guys are on my roster, I'm not really concerning myself with that? Dan?
There was a lot of thought, even as, we drafted in the Scott Fishbowl, my focus really is on having depth, having balance, having certain backups. You give good examples as they are the scenarios I think we are going to be looking at a month from now. I don't think specifically Connor or Stafford. Connor, I'm going to say no, just because I happen to hear him on a podcast pretty much proclaim that he's pretty confident in the medical team in the Steelers organization, and he's ready to go. He's playing, so I don't think that's going to surface. Mitch, you might be able to speak better to Matthew Stafford. I think his wife is healthy. God bless her from what I hear. So it sounds like his family situation at this time is stable. But, the Stafford family might be a little bit more of a dynamic where they may be having, more serious conversations of when the time comes. And my understanding is the NFL next has to, they have to agree on all these safety measures, the union and the players. And once they do on that, then they got to go through the money part like Major League Baseball did and hopefully agree there. And then I think you're going to see it coming out like it is in Major League Baseball now, where some players are like, I don't know if I'm playing or I'm not playing. And then we're going to be looking at our roster saying, oh, crap. I all of a sudden don't have a guy that I was really relying on. How does that affect me? How do I fix that? Is that someone who's rebuilding is willing to trade for? There's going to be a lot of decisions.
And these players, their top priorities, it needs to be, does Dan Lamagna have me on his roster, and how can I help him? That should be their top priority.
They should be calling first, at least just as a courtesy. McCole Hardman did retweet me the other day, proclaiming that he's going to have a monster fantasy football season for me. So I appreciated that, McCole. If you're listening to Dynasty Theory podcast tonight, you're the man. But Mitch, John, I think John has something there. They should be communicating with.
That was a really good point that John brought up about Stafford and his wife, though, because one thing we don't know is there's 4,500 players in the NFL. We don't know what their home life is. They could have kids with autoimmune diseases. They themselves could have a sickle cell trait. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff is real and that stuff is out there, and those guys might not be able to play.
We take part in a lot of tight end premium leagues, and Scott Fishbowl, even though I already told you guys I'm taking it down this year, you can see it right there. But Mark Andrews, he has diabetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are all people that are high risk in situations like this.
AJ Brown came out and said his family's first. If it's family or football, and that's how it should be. I will never say one thing against someone if they're like, you know what, I can't play this year because of my family. I'm like, all right, good for you, man. I'll never hold that against somebody. Although we know there's going to be a whole bunch of people on Twitter that do.
Well, again, our fantasy football teams need to go above their families and careers. Everybody needs to realize that. And I hope, obviously, if you're watching, you can see my my movements here, but I hope that my sarcasm is oozing over the podcast feed there. So that was not a serious comment by any means. One interesting thing that I saw earlier today. So Ross Tucker had Coach Franklin on his show. Was it yesterday, I believe? And one thing that Coach Franklin out there at Penn State said was that you can't have a practice with all of your coaches out there together, because let's say one of them sick, boom, your whole coaching staff is wiped out. So we talk about the running back room and the quarterback room, but I think it's really interesting when you bring in the coaches in, because we haven't really thought about that. I haven't. And, you know, are you going to mesh, especially these coaches, Giants, Panthers, you know, Ron Rivera out there in Washington, but, you know, they have to get their staffs together, and especially Joe Judge in New York and, Matt Rule and then Joe Brady going there to Carolina. There's lack of preparation because you're not there together as an entire coaching staff. So I thought that was a very interesting comment that was made on Ross Tucker's show.
That is a strong one. And I'd like to even add to that, John. And I don't think a lot of people are thinking how complicated and hard this planning process is. You know, everybody wants to say, you know, the NFL has had this long. I know Ross Tucker always jokes, you know, everyone just wants to bash the NFL all the time. But between safety, liability, and just all the uncertainty. I mean, we're talking about how uncertain it is just for fantasy football. I mean, if I'm an owner and a coach, what does this look like? We've heard a few conversations where I say, what about the quarterback room? You know, so if one quarterback has COVID, do you have no quarterbacks? Right. I think that they are going to have strategic plans in place to make sure social distancing measures or practicing in separate groups, or they have to have that in place, because how do you win and survive in the NFL, and how will a season go on if you don't have the proper depth and proper procedures in place? But if you think that's easy, it's far from it. And then you're cutting preseason now too. So, you know, people want to say you want to cut out the preseason, but I cannot imagine how you can't have at least 2 preseason games home and a road to walk through every little thing. I mean, having coached in the past, we walk through every single thing. I mean, there are meetings about what the hotel stay is going to be like and what we're eating and the meals, and like, every little thing is planned out. And there's nothing more competitive than the National Football League. So there's so much that goes behind it.
Yeah, if there's no preseason and if these entire coaching staffs can't get together and everything's just being done by Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, how sloppy are those first few weeks going to look? Because they could look pretty sloppy.
Oh, they will. Yep.
It's going to be like every Thursday night game that we bash. That's what it's going to be like for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the referees. I mean, are they just going to stay in everyone's home stadium? They're just going to be their home referees for this year. They're going to, because I highly doubt they're going to move them around to each game. Maybe they stay in division.
Travel, right?
Yeah. But go ahead.
Think about how much we kind of have the league mapped out, and we think we know who the strong coaches and owners are. How much you want to bet it separates itself even more this year? How well a team is coached and managed when things don't go right? Like, I think you're going to see, you know, with these rookies that have to be ready, you know, you're going to see the teams that have it together and those that don't.
Yeah, we've never seen a season like this, so it's definitely something to keep our eyes on. And then I know that, you know, last thing I want to say on Twitter. On Twitter, we've seen all the jokes like, oh, the Patriots, they're going to fix the tests and the temperatures and all that. What happens if, let's just say, Patrick Mahomes tests positive? Do we think we're ever going to see oh, no, that it came back negative. Now he's fine. I think there are people, I'm not saying the Chiefs, you know, obviously I was just picking a high-end example, but there's some sketchiness going on there within the NFL. So I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'll happen. But the only good thing that the NFL has going for them, MLB and the NBA will be starting up at least 6 weeks before they do.
Right.
So although the training camps are all supposed to start on the 20th of July, I bet they push it off for a couple of weeks for the NFL. But the MLB and NBA will be having games by that point. And so I think that's the one thing that the NFL has to get a step above. They get to see where all of these other leagues are going to fail. Mm-hmm. And then they can go in and attack it. Because one issue that's happening right now is people are testing positive. I can't remember the golfer's name, but there's a golfer that happened to it, and then Jimmy Johnson. They had the positive test. Every single test since then has been negative, but they still have to go through the quarantine because they tested positive the first time. And so the NFL having, the extra 6 weeks that those other leagues do to figure out those little, whatever you want to call them, irregularities. See, I can't even talk. But
and you're not even intoxicated right now.
I
from
know.
what I can tell.
No, I normally can't speak. We all know this. But that's just one thing that the NFL will have going for it is, every other league is going to have to test it, and then the NFL will figure it out after that.
Yeah, I think it was good for the more certainty that there will be a season, that we have these other leagues coming out and being the first few to lead the charge. And like you said, they can kind of see what they mess up on and where they can make improvements. But again, it's just me. I think it's just me trying not to be too overly optimistic, because if I get all hyped up and there's no season, I'll just be in hibernation for the rest of the year.
I'm telling you, we'll turn this into a League of Legends podcast. It'll work out great. Everyone will.
I don't even know what that is.
It'll be amazing.
All right. Well, before Mitch continues with all this nonsense, it's time for Dan's favorite segment.
Final thoughts.
All right, Dan, this has been a very unique show for us, but I think there was some good information and obviously a lot of speculation, but give our listeners a final thought for tonight.
Final thought for the listeners. Hey, hopefully they had a lot of takeaways tonight, and then I think they could tell that there is just so much uncertainty, but I think we at least provided some strategies where you could just kind of map things out and try to stay active, not let that fantasy fatigue get you. But the final thought is, Mr. Jerry Jones, if you are listening, we have until Wednesday at noon to sign this long-term contract with Dak Prescott. He always says deadlines make deals. And as you said, JB, they should be contacting us about our fantasy players. I have a lot of shares in Dak, and I would appreciate Jerry's assistance here. So that is my final thought for tonight.
Mitch, I was very close for that to be the first time that I ever used the mute button on one of you two. But Mitch, what's your final thought?
I had one, but now I'm going to change mine. So final thought is, how bad did the Cowboys screw this up? Now, they could have had Dak at $30 million. And now if they sign him, it's going to be close to 40. Mahomes got that $45 million a year. Dak's going to be close to that. That is how bad that franchise handled it. And what do we call that? Dysfunction.
All right. Well,
I'm feeling it too. It's like my lease deal, guys. 3 years ago, I had this great lease deal. Now the prices are up. I tried to get out of it early in May. I waited too long to the end of the month. I lost that great deal in May, and now here we are in July, and it's like a Dak Prescott contract. It's ridiculous. So there's a lesson there for our listeners, for their leases and for their quarterback signings. Hop on it. Strike when the irons are hot.
And my final thought, I rarely have one, but tonight, because Mitch, you and I have talked about it, but our 2020 projections, we are definitely going to be putting out a revised projection here. Well, one, our New England Patriots, it was like a week after they signed Cam Newton. I'm like, oh my goodness. All right. So those will be revised and we'll be spitting those out. We've had several people reach out, whether it's Twitter, league chats, YouTube. So if you have any interest in those, it's pinned on my Twitter, the preliminary projections, but then we'll be spitting out the final projections as well. As always, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. Follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Dynasty Theory FF. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and have a great night.